Well, the end of the trial is here, folks, and we're going to figure out one way or another how this is going to go. So, I guess if you're up in the Minneapolis area, strap yourselves in. But let's talk a bit about what's going on. First off, the mayor of Minneapolis has just come out with a statement ensuring that no matter what happens, there are going to be hurt feelings somewhere. So we'll listen to that and talk a bit about that. A school walkout expresses the desire by the students of the school to have justice, or at least what they call justice, so we'll talk a bit about that. In other news, Nancy Pelosi defends Maxine Waters for the statements that she made while she was standing out in the crowds trying to, well, get the rioters up and riled up and ready to go. And in a different riot entirely elsewhere, it turns out that Brian Sicknick wasn't actually killed by rioters. He died of natural causes, a couple days later. It's going to be all this and more. Hey, 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 do you trust the plan yet? I'm Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. And good morning, everybody, and welcome to Contemporary. My name is Jay Edgar. We've got a bunch to get to today, and it's mostly going to be riotous throughout the day. That's pretty much all that we're going to see here. And I think the markets are actually reflecting what the riots are going to do because, and I know a lot of people are pointing out that all these big riots, all they do is affect and help the ultra-rich for a couple reasons. And just to go into this before we get into everything, it really does help the ultra-rich because they're far, far away from the places that the people are rioting. In fact, and this was just the same thing we saw in Kenosha. Now, I don't know the geography of Minneapolis, but I do know the geography of Kenosha, and where they were burning was the poorest part of town. Their own neighborhoods. They didn't go over into the nice place that was just to the east up on the lakefront, and they didn't really get up past 30th Avenue either, where all the rest of the nice stuff was. A couple little things here and there, a couple storefronts, and maybe they even got out to Green Bay Road and tried to go after the Meijer as well, but they're not going into the nice areas of these cities. They're busting up the poor areas, their own areas, and, you know, then the property value plummets and people flee because they can't do anything, they've lost their businesses, and these ultra rich, on top of the fact that none of their shit got busted, also swoop in and buy up these places for pennies on the dollar too. So, well, good luck everybody who lives in Minnesota. Good luck everybody who's going to come back and have to go pick up the pieces. But either way, no matter what we get out of it right now, it's going to burn, and I hope everybody's ready for it. But before we get into this and before we get into the news, head on over and check out my friends over at the Freedom Scoop Media Group. You will find great creators such as The Freckles and Brit Show, The Generational Gap, The Daily Ignoramus, The Breakdown with Breckenhoff, and The R-Rated Conservative. And unfortunately, today we are actually going to have to compete for eyes with The Daily Ignoramus, because I noticed a little bit earlier, it does look like he is going to be running a day show today, which is probably starting in just a couple minutes as well. So, well, the news stops for nobody, even if we do have to do some crossover, but we still got to keep going. We still need to power on. So, looking in on the Dow to start off for the day, 34,077.63, a fairly significant drop as far as what we've been seeing from yesterday's markets. Down throughout the day, where we started at 34,267, so lost just under 200 points. Not even 1% yet, but everyone's anticipating seeing what the businesses are going to do, especially since Minneapolis is a fairly big hub of central business. So a lot of banks, a lot of other things, and we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Looking into the Bitcoin, it looks like it rebounded slightly yesterday, coming back up to 55,867.50. Looking in on the gas, also remaining steady here, looking like it's going to sit at 257 all the way across the Madison Metro. 253 last week. So a little bit of an increase, but not a whole hell of a lot. Let's see what the investors have to say for the morning. Starting with IBD, Investors Business Daily, Dow Jones Futures signal further losses for hard penny market rally. Netflix nearby with earnings due. From Ed Carson. Dow Jones Futures fell slightly Tuesday morning, along with S&P 500 futures and NASDAQ futures. The stock market rally had a rough Monday for growth names, including but definitely not limited to Tesla, Square, and Nvidia stock. Chip breakouts struggled with software names faltering around their 50-day line. While the major indices all remain near record highs, it's been a hard penny market, according to famed investor Mark Minervini. On Monday, IBD Live. Even with the stock market rally trending higher, entering a power trend on Friday, it's been a tough environment for making slim gains. A rising 10-year Treasury yield, a weaker Bitcoin price, and bad news for Nvidia and Tesla stock, specifically all weighed on tech stocks on Monday. Coinbase continued to consolidate following last week's much-hyped direct listing. United Airlines, Steel Dynamics, and Dow Jones giant IBM reported earnings after the close. United Airlines reported a wider-than-expected loss and missed on revenue. UAL stock sank 3% before the open. Shares fell 1.6% to $54.99 on Monday. Testing their 50-day line, airline and other travel stocks have retreated over the last few weeks after riding a reopening rally. Well, yeah, but everyone got to go do something as soon as they reopened. And now they're going back and trying to figure out how they go to work and how they go back and balance all this shit. Hey kids! We've been locked inside the house forever and ever and ever, but let's run out and let's go on a trip now before we all have to go back to work and school. There was a lot of that in the beginning, and now it's all going to come tumbling back down because, honestly, I don't want to deal with the bullshit for the plane. Well, there's the other side of that too, because there's a lot fewer people. You'll get through the lines quicker, and you'll get felt up by TSA quicker, but, you have to have the mask on forever unless you're eating, and then you have to have it back on anyway, and you're still crammed in at this point, which that was the other part that was kind of neat, is you weren't always crammed in, like sardines into the plane. So, a lot of reasons that the airlines would have a nice big jump and then a drop back off again. Steel Dynamics earnings, top forecast. Steel Dynamics rose 2% in extended trade. Shares dipped 0.6% on Monday to $51.19 intraday. Steel Dynamics took a stock hit, $52.72, just clearing a 4-week tight pattern with a $52.69 buy point. IBM earnings beat views while revenue edged higher, a rare year-over-year gain. Cloud revenue led the way. IBM stock rose 2.5% in pre-market. Shares dipped 0.35% to 131.12 on Monday. IBM stock has been consolidated for a few weeks. Investors could view that as a handle to a 14-month consolidation, with 137.17 as the buy point. But the relative strength line has been in a downtrend since late 2011, highlighting IBM stock's long-term underperformance versus the S&P 500 index. Fellow Dow Giants travelers Johnson & Johnson and Procter & Gamble beat views early Tuesday. Travelers rose slightly while Johnson & Johnson and PG stock edged lower. Well, yeah, you would expect that Johnson & Johnson would edge lower. They're losing this. Meanwhile, Canadian National Railway plans a $30 billion bid for Kansas City Southern, trumping a roughly $25 billion takeover deal by Canadian Pacific. KSU stock soared, Canadian National fell sharply, CP rose modestly. A number of earnings reports due Tuesday, but the big feature event is Netflix after the close. Shares rose 1.45% to $554.44 on Monday. Netflix stock could have a tiny handle as of Tuesday's close with a $559.85 buy point. It already has a handle, barely on a weekly chart. Arguably, Netflix stock is already at a trend line, going back to its January 20th peak, set after the quarter 4 earnings report. Netflix stock fared well Monday, but its RS line is just above a 52-week low as shares have gone sideways for the past 9 months. Nvidia and Square are on the IBD leaderboard. Square is on the IBD 50. All right, on the futures. Dow Jones futures fell 0.4% versus fair value, with IBM stock offering a slim boost. S&P 500 futures dipped 0.35%, and NASDAQ 100 futures lost 0.2%. Remember, overnight action in Dow futures and elsewhere doesn't necessarily translate into actual trading in the next regular stock market session. All right, let's see what CNBC has to say, and then we got to talk about all the shit that's happening in Minneapolis, because it's going to be a big one. I don't think this is going to be as long of a show as I've been doing, but there's a lot of stuff, and it's almost all riots. This, and this are the only things that aren't riot-related at some point or another. From CNBC, Dow slips more than 100 points from the record. NASDAQ closes 1% lower. From Yoon Lee and Pippa Stevens. U.S. stocks slipped from record levels to start the week on Monday as weakness in the technology sector weighed on the broader market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 123.04 points or 0.4% to 34,077.63, sliding from a record high in the previous session. The S&P 500 fell 0.5% to 4163.26 after closing at a fresh high on Friday. The tech-heavy NASDAQ Composite lost 1% to 13,914.77. Bitcoin was slammed over the weekend after hitting an all-time high of 64,841 Wednesday morning, according to data from Coinmetrics. At one point, it was down 19% from that record over the weekend before stabilizing. The cryptocurrency was last at 55,866 on Monday. Tesla, a holder of Bitcoin, fell more than 3%. Coinbase, a cryptocurrency trading platform that made its public debut last week, dropped 2.6%. Whenever a headline-grabbing asset sees a big decline, at a time when the broad market stands at an expensive level, it usually has a negative impact on the stock market, even if it's only short-lived, said Matt Maley, chief market strategist at Miller Tabak. Coca-Cola shares rose 0.6% after the consumer giant reported better than expected earnings and revenue. The company also said demand in March has returned to pre-pandemic levels. But still, nobody wants your shitty product because you suck. Stocks came off a week of gains as earnings topped estimates and strong economic data lifted the major averages. The S&P and Dow advanced 1.4% and 1.2% last week, respectively, for their fourth straight week of gains, while the NASDAQ posted its third positive week in a row. The first quarter earnings season got off to a robust start, led by strong results from banks. Financials earnings have topped expectations by 38%, while others in the S&P 500 have surprised the upside by 12%, according to data from Credit Suisse. So, looking at the market, it looks like there's a lot of stuff going on here. Earnings went down. People, honestly, are still looking at what's going to happen in Minneapolis at this point. So, we'll see where this goes. We'll see what happens, and we'll see what the futures do. and the next regular trading session does. And honestly, I know that the stock market is not the economy. I get a lot of criticism for that when I look and say, hey, this is what the Dow did. This is what the S&P did. What I go through when I talk about that, and the economy is much more important. Well, the stocks are a reflection of what investors think the economy is about to do within the next 24 hours usually. So it's interesting to watch where the stocks go, and that makes a good measure as to what people who analyze this every day think that public policy, especially coming up out of the White House, is going to do for them. Because they don't want to be holding on to this stuff if Biden's going to tax everybody into an oblivion, and the bottom's going to fall out of all of it. So, a lot of stuff to watch. Looks like we're going to see a down day. Let's get into the news. Starting with some F's in the chat for the morning. From Axios. Former Vice President Walter Mondale dies at 93 from Orion Rumler. Walter Mondale, who transformed the role of the U.S. Vice President while serving under Jimmy Carter and was the Democrat nominee for president in 1984, died Monday at 93, according to a family spokesperson. Wow. He and Biden are almost the same age. President Biden, who was mentored by Mondale through the years, said in 2015 that the former vice president gave him a roadmap to successfully take on the job. He was the first vice president to have an office in the White House and was deeply engaged in both U.S. and foreign policy, working closely with the president. I took Fritz's roadmap. He actually gave me a memo. Classic Fritz. He gave me a memo as to what I should be looking for and what kind of commitments I should be able to do. The job the way Fritz thought it should be done, Biden said in an event honoring Mondale in 2015. Mondale spoke by phone on Sunday with President Biden and former Presidents Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, as well as Vice President Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, said his friend and former campaign staffer Tim Cosgrove. While he and his family believed his death was imminent, after those calls, he perked up. In a final goodbye email to 320 staffers spanning 4 decades, Mondale told his staffers how much they meant to him. He knew that they'd keep up the good fight, and Joe in the White House certainly helps. The email, which was shared with Axios, was prepared to be sent on his death. Cosgrove said Mondale had deeply worried about the impact of a potential second Donald Trump term on American democracy. There was a difference after the inauguration, a letting go, Cosgrove said. There was a big exhale of relief. In his 1984 presidential run, Mondale nominated New York Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate, making her the first female nominee for vice president of any American major party. He was awarded Public Leadership and Neurology Award from the American Academy of Neurology in 2015 for raising awareness for brain health after he lost his wife Joan and daughter Eleanor to brain diseases. Mondale served as Minnesota's U.S. Senator from 1964 to 1976. He also served as a former President Clinton's ambassador to Japan. So, a lot of good stuff that came out of Mondale. Even, he was very progressive, he was very liberal, and yes, he was responsible for Biden. We do have to keep all that in mind, but he graciously lost one of the worst landslides in history, and he did do good work even in his private charity. You don't see a lot of that from politicians anymore. They'll do a little bit of private charity here, but Mondale went off and just, to get an award from the Academy of Neurology means that he was pushing on this and pushing as hard as he could. And honestly, I didn't even know who Walter Mondale was until, just a few years ago. But we give Walter Mondale a warm send-off. We're sorry that you had to talk to Joe Biden on your last days, but a warm send-off. Enjoy the afterlife. All right. Let's get into the news. Speaking of Mondale and the place that he lived and represented forever at this point, let's first listen to what the mayor of Minneapolis has to say about the riots.
For being here today. As we await the verdict, there are several inescapable truths. Over this last year, our Twin Cities have experienced a barrage of trauma, all culminating with this trial and then the verdict. There's been pain and anguish, anger and frustration that is undoubtedly acutely felt by our black and brown communities. Regardless of the outcome of this trial, regardless of the decision made by the jury, there is one true reality, which is that George Floyd was killed at the hands of police. For being here today, as we
All right, let's go
await
listen to
the
that last
verdict
part
there-
again. Just to make sure that you understand what's happening in Minneapolis right now.
By our black and brown communities. Regardless of the outcome of this trial, regardless of the decision made by the jury, there is one true reality, which is that George Floyd was killed at the hands of police.
There we go. And I just wanted to make sure you guys caught that last part as best you could, because that's exactly what the problem is right here. We've got politicians, the mayor of the city that's about to burn down, basically egging, and Clint put it right out best on that. The mayor of Minneapolis just ensured infinite rioting within his own city. For the life of me, I can't understand how people like this were entrusted with such enormous power, because he came out and said, no matter what the judicial system does, no matter what the defense did, no matter what happened in a trial by a jury of his peers, I, the governor, or mayor rather, the executive, still say Derek Chauvin is guilty. What do you think is going to happen when you say something like that? And once again, I come back from the beginning. Is this a nod out to his rich buddies and say, hey, you can pick up this property for pennies on the dollar right now. Think of all the prime tourist real estate you can have for this. Because there's one thing that's going to happen off of this. You're going to come in and people are going to get pissed off by the trial and they're going to start to riot and loot and burn. What other option do you think would happen if you say something like that? I mean, we'll listen to it one more time just to make sure we heard it correctly, but I'm positive I heard that correctly.
Regardless of the outcome of this trial, regardless of the decision made by the jury, there is one true reality, which is that George Floyd was killed at the hands of police.
And what if a jury of his peers says otherwise? What if a jury of his peers looks at this and says, you know what, no, I doubt that this happened. There is reasonable doubt of this. Or, hell, they even look at this, and I know you're not supposed to have to prove your innocence, but if they look at this and say, wow, look at this tox report. Look at all this other medical data. There's no way that Derek Chauvin did this. And yet they're still going to come out and say, no, he did it. I don't even know where to begin with this, but let's get into the news and see what's going on with this as well. First off, one of the first casualties of this, and I don't know if this is related or not, but it's in the city itself, so we will have to come back and see whether or not this is related. From KSTP5 ABC out of St. Paul. Northeast Minneapolis church heavily damaged after fire. No author given. A church in northeast Minneapolis suffered heavy damage after a fire broke out on Monday evening. According to the Minneapolis Fire Department, firefighters were called just before 7 p.m. to the 2200 block of 5th Street Northeast to a report of a fire at Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish. Minneapolis Fire Chief Brian Tyner said there were people still inside the church when firefighters arrived who were evacuated. 2 aerial ladders were used to extinguish the fire in the building's structure, roof, and bell tower. Firefighters were able to knock down the fire, however, the roof collapsed. The cause of the fire is under investigation. No injuries were reported. A GoFundMe was set up to help the church community. And I don't know anything about this church specifically. I don't know if this was a black church, if this was some sort of riot damage. I don't know anything about this. This might be an electrical thing, but given the fact of everything else that we're seeing in the rest of Minneapolis, it does raise suspicion. It does raise red flags. And I do hope that, we can get out and get some repairs done for this church. I hope that the parish can find a new place to worship until they can get this back up, running, ready to go, or they can find a new place to go permanently if there is too much damage to the church. Generally, when the roof caves in, there's too much structural damage to repair the building, but hopefully they can at least find a new place to gather. So that may be the first casualty, and it may just be an completely unrelated coincidence. We will see. I got one here from CBS 4, WCCO, out of Minnesota. With Chauvin verdict looming, Facebook deems Minneapolis high-risk location and will remove content that promotes violence. So does that mean Maxine Waters' fan page is going to go away? Because she legitimately promoted violence, you guys. This is from WCCO TV staff. Facebook officials say they're preparing for the verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin and will be removing content that calls for violence in Minneapolis. According to Facebook, Minneapolis has been deemed a high-risk location due to the events surrounding the trial and potential outcome. Our teams are working around the clock to look for potential threats on both on and off Facebook and Instagram so we can protect peaceful protests and limit content that could lead to civil unrest or violence, said Monica Bickert, Vice President of Content Policy at Facebook. Calls to bring arms to the areas in Minneapolis will be identified and removed. Gee, I wonder who's going to be doing those. Facebook will also be monitoring the situation to determine if other locations will be deemed as temporary high-risk locations. Facebook will be giving a high level of protection to George Floyd when it comes to bullying and harassment because Floyd is considered an involuntary public figure. Oh, so you're not going to be able to come... Am I streaming on Facebook right now? Oh, fuck it, I don't give a fuck. So you're not going to be able to come out and say, well, George Floyd, he was on drugs at the time, so maybe this wasn't necessarily a thing. I bet you that's going to be something that happens off this if anybody insinuates that George Floyd may have passed away from his own doing. That we're actually going to see those posts get taken down because they're bullying. And he can't come in and defend himself. And this is the best part here. We consider Derek Chauvin a public figure for voluntarily placing himself in the public eye, which means we will remove attacks that are severe in line with our policies, Bickert said. What? Hold on. Derek Chauvin, whether or not he is guilty on this, responded to a police call where somebody else, outside of the specific situation he was in, pulled out a cell phone and started filming. How is that voluntarily placing himself in the public eye? If anything, that's involuntarily placing himself in the public eye. What? This is so fucked up. This is beyond fucking parody at this point. Potential misinformation will also be flagged to the company's third-party fact-checkers, Snopes. Facebook official said, including graphic content that will be marked as disturbing or sensitive. Closing arguments are underway in the Chauvin trial Monday, with the jury expected to get the case soon, and they are already in deliberating. And there's also, just like I said last night on the Red Net Show, there is a good chance that the verdict drops while we're sitting here on Contemporary. Anybody who is streaming for the next few days runs the risk of having the news change while they're on the air, myself included. So it could very well happen that somebody in the chat comes out and says, the verdict is here, guys. The verdict is here. All right. There is a school from James Packard. Now, as closing arguments continue in the Derek Chauvin trial, students at more than 100 schools across Minnesota, including here in St. Louis Park, are walking out of school in protest of racial inequity. Not inequality, inequity. Equality of outcome. Now, looking at the front, and this is this is coming from somebody who has actually experienced and witnessed a walkout at a school before. And I've got an article to go with this as well, but I want to back up for this for just a second. Now, yes, a lot of these kids are brainwashed to believe whatever it is that the news comes back and tells them is the most important thing in the world. I mean, hell, when we were kids, we did the same thing. And you could see it all around me, too. And, even I fell into it at some point. I was, that's what kids do. 16-year-olds and even younger come out and they respect what authority tells them to. Even the most anti-authority ones still have some respect for what authority tells them to do. But when I was in high school, my best friend and anybody who's been with my channel for a long time knows this. My best friend got involved in a situation where he was accused. It wound up that he didn't do it, but he was accused of snapping and threatening to come back and shoot up our school. And this was in 2000, back when Columbine was still fresh in all our minds. And he got accused of it. He didn't do it. He didn't say it, and I know he didn't. But he got accused of it, and so he got suspended for his own safety for a few days. And when he was brought back to school, when he was allowed to come back, there was a walkout. And I know, because it's a small town, I know everybody who was involved in that. And there were only 6 people leading the walkout that actually gave a fuck that my best friend was back in school. There were only 6 people in that whole group, which was probably about 100 to 110 people, maybe. There were only 6 people that gave a damn about the fact that he was let back into school. The rest of them were out there because, hey, I don't have to go to class. I think the ratio in this particular group is actually going to be a little bit higher in the favor of the people who actually care about the cause, but you're still going to have a large amount of people that said, hey, cool, I get a free pass out of class because I'm protesting. So that's something else to pay attention to as we're sitting here with this. Not all of them are lemmings. Some of them are just looking for a chance to go out and hang out with their friends and go to Subway or something. All right, from Yahoo News. Hundreds of students in Minnesota walked out to protest the killings of Daunte Wright and George Floyd. From Azmi Haroon. High school students across the state of Minnesota walked out of class on Monday to protest the police killings of George Floyd and Daunte Wright. Students from the St. Paul Conservatory for Performing Arts, because of course it's the Conservatory for Performing Arts. Why wouldn't it be? So the ratio actually might be a little bit higher than I initially anticipated. Marched to the Capitol building in solidarity with Daunte Wright and his family, according to local journalist Amadalat Ajasa, who is reporting for The Guardian. Because, of course, it's The Guardian. The walkout was organized by a group called Minnesota Teen Activists, according to Minnesota Star Tribune, and I still guarantee you that at least 50% of that crowd was just looking for a pass out of class.
Before George Floyd, there were over 400 deaths related to police violence. Roughly 6 months after Floyd's death, the Eid, a 23-year-old Somali man, was killed in a routine traffic stop. Before George Floyd, there were over 400 deaths related to police violence. Roughly 6 months after Floyd's death, the Eid, a 23-year-old Somali man, was killed in a routine traffic stop.
At a separate march in downtown Minneapolis, students chanted, "National Guard, go home." Okay, you kids, you have to understand something. Trump's not the president anymore, so it's okay for the National Guard to be there. The media says it's okay for the National Guard to be there right now. See, it's not a Republican president. But these privileged fucking yuppie kids, it's going to be funny to me, and I'm sorry to say this because the parents are going to be the ones that suffer the most off of this, but it's going to be funny to me to see that if they actually got their way, what would happen in their neighborhoods. Because these kids that are standing here at the Capitol building, they are not, especially if they're going to the Conservatory for Performing Arts, these kids don't live in the neighborhoods that are going to burn. That much I can promise you. I don't know much about the Twin Cities, but I know that much. This story is developing, so check back later. National Guard, go home. This is brainwashing to a point. And yes, I do also have to... I would love to get a head count of who left the school versus who made it to the Capitol. Because there's going to be a large disparity between those two numbers. Alright, let's keep going. I got one from NBC for you guys. Minnesota lawmaker proposes revoking convicted protesters' student loans, food stamps. From Alan Smith. A Minnesota lawmaker introduced legislation to punish any person convicted of crimes in connection with a protest by making them ineligible for state government assistance, including food stamps, student loans, unemployment benefits, and health care. The legislation, authored by Republican State Senator David Osmek, would affect a litany of state programs that faces a difficult path to become law because the state House and Governor's office are controlled by Democrats, who are endorsing this, by the way. The bill says after a conviction, the person would not be eligible for any type of state loan, grant, or assistance, including but not limited to college student loans and grants, rent and mortgage assistance, supplemental nutrition assistance, unemployment benefits, and other employment assistance. Minnesota supplemental aid programs, business grants, medical assistance, general assistance, and energy assistance. I like this idea, but it's never going to fly. Even with conviction, you are still allotted equal protection under the law, and as long as there are government programs, they have to protect equally. You can't do that based on conviction status. As much as I think it would work, as long as it's a government program, you are entitled to equal protection under the law. It sucks, and the government shouldn't be involved in any of this stuff, but you can't discriminate on people that way either, unfortunately. It is a good idea. I like the idea. I really do. But I know where this is going to turn, and this is going to turn out even worse for the state if it were to pass. And as the article says, this is more of a GOP lawmaker looking out here and saying, hey, I can say that I put this up here and guarantee my re-election for the next 10 terms. Because, hey, look at me. I tried to stop the rioting by taking away their money. It's a power play. It's the same thing with the court packing and everything else we're seeing coming out of the Democrat Congress right now, the spending packages and everything that can't get past the filibuster, that they keep trying to cram through, but is actually not going to go anywhere because it doesn't pass the filibuster. They can do the big ask, and then they can go back to their constituents and say, hey, look, see what we did? Hey, make sure your friends in your red areas come out and vote for us too, because, hey, you know what? We did this. That's the same as what this is. I really wish we could do something like this because these people protest the government and they depend on the government at the same time. But there is equal protection under the law. And if you revoke that for people you don't like, it's going to come back around to you. And I said the same thing. The big discussion came up in libertarian circles yesterday, talking about putting a dirty cop in jail and calling that an unlibertarian position, which it is a very unlibertarian position. To just put somebody in jail because he's your political enemy. The statement that I made about that is you do need to be careful when you use the state to hang your political enemy without due process of law. And there, people like Hagopian do actually believe that Chauvin should just be in jail for the fact that he was a cop and a dirty cop. Not necessarily the shaky case that the state presented as far as what happened to George Floyd. But just because he was a dirty cop, we should just get rid of habeas corpus and put him in prison. And I've seen some of that in the live chat too. I understand that. But no, there is due process. And if you use the state to hang your political enemy without due process for a crime that he committed that's not being currently tried, then you'll be the next one on the gallows without due process. Equal protection is an important thing, and we do need to respect the fact that it's out there. All right. Let's keep going. I got one here from NPR for you guys. A little bit of a continuation of what we talked about with Maxine Waters yesterday morning and yesterday afternoon on the RedNet show as well. So, Judge denies mistrial request over Representative Waters' confrontational comment. This is from Barbara Sprunt, and make sure that you give some money to NPR because they need your money. It's not your money, comrade. It's our money. And it's not just the taxpayer money that helps to fund them. They need our money, comrade, to make sure that they can continue to spread their communist messages around the country. NPR, National Progressive Radio. Come, comrade, let us be communist. Let's see what they have to say. The judge in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin criticized comments made by Maxine Waters over the weekend, calling them disrespectful to the rule of law, but rejected a motion from the defense to use her rhetoric as grounds for a mistrial. Well, if there's conviction, those are going to be up there for an appeal. So watch for that. I'm aware that Congresswoman Waters was talking specifically about this trial and about the unacceptability of anything less than a murder conviction, and talk about being confrontational, Judge Peter Cahill said on Monday, as the closing arguments wrapped up in the trial of Chauvin for the killing of George Floyd. The trial is now with jury. Let's listen to what Cahill had to say, shall we?
I'm aware that Congresswoman Waters was talking specifically about this trial and about the unacceptability of anything less than a murder conviction, and talk about being confrontational, but you can submit the press articles about that. This goes back to what I've been saying from the beginning. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function. I think if they want to give their opinions, they should do so in a respectful and in a manner that is consistent with their oath to the Constitution, to respect a co-equal branch of government. Their failure to do so, I think, is abhorrent, but I don't think it has prejudiced us with additional material that would prejudice this jury. They have been told not to watch the news. I trust they are following those instructions, and that there is not in any way a prejudice to the defendant beyond the articles that we're talking specifically about the facts of this case. A congresswoman's opinion really doesn't matter a whole lot. Anyway, so motion for mistrial is denied.
Now, Cahill makes actually a couple good points in this one. He talks about what Maxine Waters said and what the actual court procedure is for mistrial, and based on what we see happening with this. He's absolutely correct in the fact that the jury has been ordered not to watch the news. Now, unfortunately, that does not mean that they don't have some family member that looked at this, saw this out there and said, "Oh my God, they're going to burn down the city. I know my family member. I know my cousin's on the jury. I've got to tell this person because I don't want that person's home to be burned. I don't want anything to happen to my cousin, the juror." And I don't know how deeply they are sequestered at this point. I don't know if they've surrendered cell phones. I don't know if they're going home, going to hotel. It did look like they were possibly going to be going home because of COVID restrictions, which also kind of makes me nervous on this whole thing. And really looking at this trial, this does seem like it was set up in order to intimidate jurors to get the right outcome. I mean, you look at what we see. You look at the fact that this trial didn't happen until after Donald Trump was out of office. You look at the fact that we are doing this trial and the whole thing happened under the commie fucking coup, which means you can't exactly sequester people into a small room in the courtroom as you normally would. Normally they stay right in the courthouse because then they don't get contact to the outside world, instead of going home every night after everything. Plus, you've usually done this a lot sooner, rather than watching the media yell about this guy, have the funeral with the golden casket about the guy, have him lie in state in the Capitol, be shipped around the country so people can grieve over over his casket and have a little girl tell Joe Biden that Daddy changed the world. This is an unusual trial under numerous, many circumstances. And yes, I believe there is going to be an intimidation factor on the jury. There's no way that there isn't at this point. I would have called this a mistrial coming in. Legitimately based on the fact that they waited until April of the next year, almost a year, to have the trial. With wall-to-wall coverage. But that's where it goes. All right. Let's see. I got one here from The Hill for you. More on the Maxine Waters saga. McCarthy to introduce resolution to censure Waters. It's not going anywhere. From Christina Marcos. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said Monday that he will introduce a resolution to censure Representative Maxine Waters for saying that we've got to get more confrontational and we've got to stay on the street to protest police brutality against black Americans. McCarthy accused Waters, who chairs the House Financial Services Committee, of inciting violence during the murder trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who's charged with the murder of George Floyd and whose actions set off nationwide protests against the racial injustice last summer. This weekend in Minnesota, is there video? There's not video. This weekend in Minnesota, Maxine Waters broke the law by violating curfew and then incited violence. Speaker Pelosi is ignoring Waters' behavior. That's why I'm introducing a resolution to censure Representative Waters for those dangerous comments, McCarthy announced on Twitter. I'm going to tell you right now that if this does come down, this will be forced into a floor vote. Pelosi's not going to let this go by voice vote. This is going to be forced to a floor vote. And there's a reason it's going to be forced to a floor vote, because then Nancy Pelosi can see everybody who voted yes on it and can look up and say, okay, I'm going to make your life a living hell because you decided that you wanted to do this, because you wanted to vote for this. Just like she did with Katie Hill. You better fucking resign, bitch, or I'm going to make your life in Congress a living hell. We can't have you doing this because we blame Republicans for this all the time. And it's going to be the same thing. Nancy Pelosi knows how to pressure people. And once she's got that floor vote out there, you know exactly who voted for what. Honestly, given the fact that Maxine Waters said this, if McCarthy had a voice vote on it, I bet you the yays would take it. Just because, these people are looking at this and they're seeing their constituents hurting right now. Not just their poor constituents, but their big, rich donors too. And Maxine Waters absolutely did. Absolutely incited violence. But with that floor vote, you're on record. You're on record. And then Pelosi and the DNC goes back to your constituents and says, hey, we got to primary this person out. And I don't even think it would be entirely Pelosi, but I think she would have a hand in it. I think you'd see a lot more like AOC Biscuit doing something like that. Hey, puppy. This congressperson here, who you think is a Democrat, voted to censure Maxine Waters, okay, puppy? And, okay, now I've got this ultra-progressive person, and we're going to put it in place, and we're going to primary this person, okay? So, yeah, that's definitely what's going on with that. Waters attended a protest against police brutality in nearby Brooklyn Center, Minnesota on Saturday, following the fatal police shooting of Dante Wright, and told reporters that we have got to get justice for this country, and we can't allow these killings to continue. We got to stay on the street. We got to get more active. We got to get more confrontational. If you see anybody from that cabinet, at a grocery store, in a gasoline station, we got to make sure that they know that we mean business. McCarthy could force a procedural vote on his resolution if he files it as a privileged resolution, which would trigger a process that requires House floor action within 2 legislative days. The effort is still sure to fail, assuming Democrats reject it, but it would be nevertheless require all House members to participate in a roll call vote on Waters. Waters maintained in an interview with The Griot published on Monday that her remarks should not be interpreted as encouraging violence. Really? Live chat. Answer me this question, will you? What exactly do you interpret it as? And I could be reading into this wildly wrongly. But what exactly do you interpret the statement of, we've got to get more confrontational as? How do you interpret that statement? I would say that's calling for violence, but if I am way off base, if I am massively, massively off base, tell me. I'll accept it. I talk about confronting the justice system, confronting policing that's going on. I'm talking about speaking up. I'm talking about legislation. I'm talking about elected officials doing what needs to be done to control their budgets and pass legislation, Waters said. I'm not worried about whether they're going to continue to distort what I say. This is who they are and how they act. I am not going to be bullied by them, Waters added of Republicans. Well, yeah, it's hard to be bullied when you are the one that's doing the bullying. Wow. Okay, well, there's the resolution. Let's talk about Pelosi in the... From Yahoo News. Pelosi. Waters should not apologize for urging protesters to get more confrontational. From Brittany Bernstein. This comes to Yahoo News via the National Review. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Monday said she does not believe Representative Maxine Waters should apologize for her recent suggestion that protesters get more confrontational if former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is acquitted. Maxine Waters talked about confrontation in the matter of the civil rights movement. I myself think we should take our lead from George Floyd family, Pelosi said during an appearance on CNN. They've handled this with great dignity and no ambiguity or lack of misrepresentation on the other side. No, I don't think she should apologize, she added. On Saturday, Waters traveled to Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, to join protests in response to the police shooting of Daunte Wright last week. A local officer fatally shot a 20-year-old Wright during a traffic stop and then turned herself in and said, "I done wrong, please prosecute me." The officer, who officials say intended to discharge a taser, not a handgun, has resigned and has been charged with second-degree manslaughter. Overcharged. Speaking a few miles from where George Floyd died last year, after Chauvin knelt on his neck for more than 9 minutes during his arrest, Waters said that she was going to fight with all the people who stand for justice and called on others to join her. We got to get justice in this country, and we can't allow these killings to continue, she said. Reporters asked Waters about the potential verdict in Chauvin's case, which is expected to be handed down this week. Waters responded by saying that activists have got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active if he's not found guilty. We got to get more confrontational, Waters said, according to Fox News. We got to make sure that they know we mean business. So, a lot of the stuff we knew already coming into this, but yes, of course, Nancy Pelosi is going to defend Waters because she's too busy trying to have Democrats removed from the House. She can't afford to lose Republicans removed from the House. She can't afford to lose one of her own. All right, I got another one from CBS 4 WCCO out of Minnesota. Another thing that's possibly attributed to the protests and possibly not. Investigation underway after fatal shooting in North Minneapolis. Again, from WCCO TV staff, no author given. Police are investigating after a man was fatally shot early Tuesday morning in North Minneapolis. The Minneapolis Police Department says the shooting happened around 2 a.m. in the home of the 5100 block at DuPont Avenue North, near the Jenny Lind Elementary School. A ShotSpotter alert and several 911 calls prompted the officers to respond to the home where they found a man believed to be in his late teens suffering from a gunshot wound. Officers attempted life-saving measures, but paramedics pronounced the man dead at the scene. The victim's identity has yet to be released. Investigators say that several people were taken to the police department for questioning. They are seeking more witnesses. So far, no arrests have been made. According to Minneapolis police, this death marks the 21st homicide in the city that year. That's nearly 10 more than this time last year. Which is ridiculous. So I don't know if this is directly protest related at this point, or if this is just somebody came out or decided that somebody needed somebody's stuff more than the other person did. But strap yourselves in, because we're going to see a lot of this coming out of the Minneapolis Metro for the next few days, no matter what the outcome is. And defund those police too, man. All right, I've got one here for you guys. Ron Paul disguises Federal Reserve as Nike store in hopes rioters will burn it down. Yeah, this one is from the Babylon Bee. But it's still funny. I looked at this, this was shared in a group chat that I participated in, and I looked at that and I said, well, that one just made the morning show. According to sources, former Representative Ron Paul was seen disguising the Federal Reserve building as a Nike store in hopes of getting BLM and Antifa rioters to burn the place down. Shortly after the new sign was hung up, witnesses say a large crowd gathered outside to loot the building and then torch it. Hey, kids, the Libertarian leader said to the crowd, you want to keep letting the central bankers borrow and print money until it has no value and the dollar collapses and our entire economy destroyed? Look, it's a Nike store. Let's loot it. Rioters broke in, but were disappointed not to find any cool sneakers. Instead, they just found stacks of paper and fancy Goldman Sachs fountain pens. Aww. I want a fancy Goldman Sachs fountain pen. I like fountain pens. I've got one sitting right here, in fact. How do I get a fancy Goldman Sachs fountain pen? Hey, what kind of Nike store is this? Said one frustrated looter. This isn't Nike, it's something far worse, replied Paul. Have you ever heard of the Federal Reserve? The entire crowd then sat on the floor cross-legged and listened intently to Ron Paul explain the horrors of central banking. Immediately after the speech, they burned down the Federal Reserve. And a happy ending was had by all. All right. From CBS News, Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes after defending the Capitol on January 6th, medical examiner says. I wanted to actually read this from CBS News, but then I want to go back and talk about the Washington Post article about this. But this, let me get through this and then we'll talk about this for a second. Capitol Police Officer, oh, did I have an author? Let me get an author. From Victoria Albert. Always give credit where credit's due. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes a day after defending the Capitol during the January 6th assault. The D.C. Medical Examiner's Office announced Monday. Sicknick was previously believed to have died from injuries sustained during the riot. Sicknick died from strokes, the Chief Medical Examiner's Office said in a report summary, citing acute brainstem and cerebellar infarcts due to acute basilar artery thrombosis. That was a mouthful of really big words. Let me dumb that down for you guys. He had a stroke the day after the riot. In an interview with the Washington Post, the chief medical examiner, Francisco J. Diaz, said Sicknick suffered 2 strokes at the base of his brainstem caused by a clot in the artery. Hey, maybe he got the vaccine. Too soon? Too soon? At approximately 2:20 p.m. on January 6th, Sicknick was sprayed with a chemical substance outside the Capitol, the office said. He collapsed 8 hours later and died the following evening. Despite being sprayed with a chemical substance, Sicknick's manner of death was determined to be natural, the medical examiner's office said. In the interview with the Post, Diaz said the autopsy found no evidence of internal or external injuries or of an allergic reaction to the chemical substance, but did say all that transpired played a role in his condition. The natural classification is used when a disease alone causes death, the medical examiner's office said in the summary. If the death is hastened by an injury, the manner of death is not considered natural. The medical examiner's office has not publicly released a full report, which, from CBS, they are objective. They are closer to objective than a lot of other outlets. They definitely still have a bias, and it's definitely a bias that would try to help determine that Sicknick got killed by getting his head bashed in by a fire extinguisher. But the Washington Post came out and did this too. Capitol Police officers Brian Sicknick, who engaged rioters, suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes, officials say. From Peter Herman, Capitol Police officer Brian D. Sicknick suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes the day after he confronted rioters at the January 6th insurrection. Selfie fest. The district chief medical examiner has ruled. The ruling, released Monday, likely will make it difficult for prosecutors to pursue homicide charges in the officer's death. Aww, so sad. Just wait, it gets better. 2 men are accused of assaulting Sicknick by spraying powerful chemical irritant at him during the siege. Yeah, they're going to walk. In an interview with the Washington Post, where democracy goes to die in darkness, Francisco J. Diaz, the medical examiner, said the autopsy found no evidence the 42-year-old officer suffered an allergic reaction to chemical irritants, which Diaz said would have caused Sicknick's throat to quickly seize. Diaz also said there was no evidence of internal or external injuries. The medical examiner noted Sicknick was among the officers who engaged the Capitol mob and said that all that transpired played a role in his condition. Which is funny, because an external injury or external stress, too, would, just as we saw in the CBS article, would cause the medical examiner to come back out and say that, no, this was not due to natural causes. If anything external hastened this, it wouldn't have been to natural causes. Furthermore, the Washington Post lied to you. They have time of death. They know when the guy went home the next day. Everybody else came out and told you this. All of alt media came out and told you this. And now the mainstream media is going to come out and say this too. They lied to you, and they don't give a fuck that they lied to you. This is not them coming out and say, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea ultima culpa, mea ultima culpa. This is not the Washington Post doing this. This is the Washington Post coming out and taking a fucking victory lap and saying, haha, we fucking fooled you. We made you believe what we wanted you to believe. And now you're doing our bidding because of it. You believed, and you went out and you attacked people on social media who tried to present the actual facts because we told you to. You are in our control now. This is what the Washington Post is doing, where democracy goes to fucking die in darkness. And you know what else that means? That means that the only people that died from the Capitol Selfie Fest were the people coming in and taking the fucking selfies. It was the state killing unarmed people. It's the only people who died. The police killing unarmed people coming into the building were the only people who died. And yet we're not going to get a riot over that. We're not going to get a burn down of DC over that. We're not going to get a burn of the Federal Reserve off of that. And people are still going to come out and say that the police officer that killed Ashley Babbitt, who was unarmed and did nothing but poke her head up after trying to climb through a window, is going to be lauded as a patriot by these fucking people. So, there you go. The Washington Post lied, and they're bragging about it at this point. All right. From Fox 13, out of Tampa Bay, Governor DeSantis signs an anti-riot bill imposing harsher criminal penalties on violent protesters. From Elizabeth Fry and Fox 13 News staff. Backed by law enforcement from all over Central Florida at the Polk County Sheriff's Office, the governor signed his controversial anti-rioting bill into law on Monday. The measure is meant to stiffen penalties on violent protesters. It is the strongest anti-rioting, pro-law enforcement piece of the legislation in the country. There is nothing close, said Governor Ron DeSantis. The new law stiffens penalties for people arresting during a riot, making it illegal to topple statues or monuments, and creates a new kind of crime known as mob intimidation. It's already illegal to topple a statue and a monument. That's called vandalism. It's extra super secret vandalism now. It's just like the anti-lynching thing. And I like DeSantis. So to come out and say that he's going to stiffen the penalties is cool. But you don't make a new law for something that's already illegal, dude. You know, it's a give and take for me. And I call balls and strikes when I see them. Mob intimidation could include disturbing diners during a disturbance, which happened in St. Pete, or blocking a roadway during a demonstration, which happened in Lakeland. The law also blocks cities and counties from defunding the police and penalizes them if they tell law enforcement to stand down during a riot. If you tell law enforcement to stand down, then you're responsible for the damage that ensues, and if someone has been harmed or their property has been destroyed, then they can sue you, the municipality, for compensation. Opponents say the legislation is overly broad and can be easily misused. Yeah, probably. I wouldn't give this kind of power to a Democrat politician who could possibly sometime in the future succeed Ron DeSantis. I think that's a bad idea. This bill left just enough room for persecutors to abuse the law to criminalize the mere presence at a large public gathering where other people are doing something wrong, said Hillsborough County State Attorney Andrew Warren. So basically Andrew Warren is telling you what it is that he's going to do if a Democrat comes into power. Mark my words, that's what's going to happen, by the way. Black Lives Matter Restoration Polk is also highly critical of the law because why wouldn't they be? It just gives law enforcement the ability to terrorize anyone who's protesting peacefully, commenter Pastor Carl Soto of BLM Restoration Polk says. Soto said his organization is looking into possible legal action. I'd actually like to sit down and read this bill because I have not read it yet. I spent most of my day preparing the RedNet show yesterday, so I haven't looked into this one yet, but definitely something to look into, see. So I'd like to see it, like to understand what's in it, because I like to read these bills so I can come back and communicate what's in them effectively. But I have not read this one yet. But the sheriff decided he was going to make a statement as well. And I chose the Daily Wire because they generally have video. I don't know if they're going to have video on this one or not. Looks like they've got a YouTube video, but I don't know if we're going to get to hear what the sheriff... No, I don't have the video of what the sheriff had to say. I'll go dig for that at some point today and see if I can get this on for tomorrow. But it was even... we'll read the transcript at least, but it was even funnier to hear the sheriff say it himself. Florida Sheriff warns new residents, do not ruin the state by voting for policies that you're escaping. From Daily Wire News. Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd warned Monday that people who are moving to Florida must not vote the way they did in the states they're fleeing, assuming that they voted for Democrat politicians, otherwise they will turn their new home state into the one they fled. Judd made the remarks during the press conference with Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, during which he signed an anti-riot bill into law that creates tougher penalties for those who engage in violent riots. Never have I seen the leadership that I see with Governor DeSantis, with Speaker Sprowls, and with President Simpson, Judd said. They're making positive difference, not just for government, but for the people of the state of Florida. Florida's a unique place and a special place. It's where we work, it's where we live, and it's also where the world comes to play to bring their children, and their children have the right to be safe. Judd highlighted the far-left riots that have devastated communities in Democrat-controlled cities across the U.S., including Seattle, Portland, and Minneapolis, and said that the officials would not allow that to happen in Florida. "We got a new law, and we're going to use it if you make us," Judge said. "We're going to protect the people. No longer will people walk up and surround you as a citizen of Florida or a visitor of Florida, surround you while you're eating dinner at an outdoor cafe or in a big mob without there being immediate consequences and arrest. It's not acceptable." Without specifically mentioning the Democrat Party, Judd warned people moving to Florida that they need to vote differently than the way they may have in the states they were fleeing. It can be reasonably inferred that Judd was warning people against voting for Democrats, given that he endorsed pro-Trump candidates in Florida during the last election cycle, was appointed to the Trump administration's Coordinating Council in Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and is a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment. "We're a special place. There are millions of people who like to come here, and quite frankly, we like to have them here. So we only want to share one thing as you move hundreds a day. Welcome to Florida, but don't register to vote and vote the stupid way you did up north, or you'll get what they got." Let me actually just see what this is. No, it's 30 minutes. We're not going to watch this whole thing. Never mind. All right. And that's absolutely right. If you go move to a place, and you see this with Georgia and California, Georgia and Texas especially, with California expats fleeing out to Georgia and Texas because the movie industry is fleeing to Georgia, and Texas has untapped natural resources and land, and has a climate similar to Texas in most places, unless you get down towards Houston where it's muggy as all fucking shit. But they're going there, escaping the taxes, the violence, and they're voting for the same politicians, or different politicians with the same values, who created the system that caused the taxes and the violence. So yeah, and that's the thing too. I know that a lot of people in the north central area of the United States, your Montanas, your Idahos, the Dakotas, the Wyomings, are starting to see a lot of California plates running around their states. And a lot of people coming in, snapping up property and houses, because, once again, like with Montana, there's just massive untapped land in Montana for people to just go out and buy and parcel off and make a fortune off of. And then they come in and they vote the same way that they did in California when they left. They come in hoping to strike it rich, that was the reason a lot of people went to California in the first place, whether it be the gold rush or Hollywood. You go to California to strike it rich, and then you vote for policies that make you poor. And then you go somewhere else to go hope to strike it rich, and then vote for policies that'll make you poor. It's a vicious cycle. All right. Well, let's keep going. I got one from KTLA 5 out of Los Angeles. I thought this one was kind of interesting. Following backlash, the nomination of Dr. Drew for LA Homeless Commission was pulled. From the LA Times, no author given. A celebrity doctor nominated to local homeless commission has been pulled from consideration after a community members objected and mounted a Dump Dr. Drew Twitter campaign accusing him of promoting policies that criminalize homelessness. Well, to be fair, that's what Rudy did in New York City, and you had some of the homeless problems start to get cleaned up. You get these people off the streets, and you get them either in jail or into the institution, because there's a good chance that a lot of these people are homeless because they don't have the mental capacity to keep a job. So you get them into the institution where they can get the help that they need, and you clear up some of your homeless problem. Especially if they're the ones that need help. Now, there are people that just go out there and do it just because, but if you're a person especially that needs the help, wouldn't you rather have that person in the hospital under a doctor's care than out on the street pooping in a gutter. I know what I would rather have for people. LA County Supervisor Catherine Barger announced Monday evening that she had withdrawn her nomination for Dr. Drew Pinsky, more commonly known as Dr. David Drew Pinsky, more commonly known as Dr. Drew, for the LA Homeless Services Authority, a 10-member commission appointed by city and county elected officials. Barger, who represents the 5th District, said she was dismayed that anyone would question the appointment of a doctor with a passion for addressing these issues when a new voice is clearly needed. She said the nomination and the outcry generated had become a distraction from the important conversations about care for people experiencing homelessness. I don't know if criminalizing homelessness is the answer, but definitely getting the care for some of these people, especially if you're in California, for God's sakes, where you just give away money to people left and right like it's candy. So that's what we see coming out of that. Last one, then we'll do Twitter trending and head on out of here. From CNN Business, Apple will let Parler back on the App Store. From Brian Fung. Apple has approved Parler's return to the iOS App Store following improvements the social media company made to better detect and moderate hate speech and incitement, according to a letter the iPhone maker sent to Congress on Monday. Well, there you have it. Parler's going to suck. The decision clears the way for Parler, an app popular with conservatives, including some members of the far right, to be downloaded once again on Apple devices. The letter, addressed to Senator Mike Lee and Representative Ken Buck, and obtained by CNN, explained that since the app was removed from Apple's platform in January for violations of its policies, Parler has proposed updates to its app and the app content moderation practices. On April 14th, Apple's new app review team told Parler that its proposed changes were sufficient. The letter continued, "Now, all Parler needs to do is flip the switch." Apple anticipates that the updated Parler app will become available immediately upon Parler releasing it, Apple's letter said. Apple declined to comment. Parler didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. So, Parler's going to suck. End of story. They're going to be as sucky as Twitter, where people who toe the left-wing progressive line are able to get away with as much fucking hate speech as they want. And if somebody who toes the right-wing populist line even so much as breathes, where we go one, we go all, it's curtains for that fucking person. So, well, I guess enjoy your sucky Parler. Alright, and that is going to be it for the news for the day, and the last thing that we do on a Tuesday is Twitter trending. So let's get to the Explore tab and let's see what's trending. Trending today, number 1. You knew what it was going to be. Happy 420. People celebrate cannabis culture on April 20th, a drug that is now legalized for recreational use in 16 U.S. states and the District of Columbia. Honestly, the fact that it's legalized kind of takes, and this is just my outlook of it, and of course I still don't do it because it's federally criminalized and I've got a CDL, which means that I can get popped for anything and have to go back and take the test. But honestly, with it being decriminalized at this point, the thing with the 420 kind of loses some of its meaning. I'm sorry. I know that a lot of the libertarians like to go out and enjoy smoking it, but really, honestly, once the government has decriminalized it, you're not really giving the finger to the man anymore at that point. I mean, I hope you still enjoy it, but you're not doing what you used to be doing with it. It was less about going out and getting high, from what I could see, and more about, especially with the people I hung out with that did it, and more about giving the finger to the man, sticking it to the man. But you're not sticking it to the man anymore. But regardless, enjoy your 420. T-Mobile Tuesday is an advertisement. I'm actually going to skip that one. So number 3, which will be our second, Ted Nugent. Apparently Ted Nugent has tested positive for the commie coof after calling the pandemic a scam. Well, two things can be true at once. The commie coof can be a real thing, and the reaction to it can also be a fucking scam. These two things are not mutually exclusive. All right. What else do we have here? Tuesday motivations. Nope, we're not going to do that one. Luther Vandross. Apparently today is Luther Vandross's birthday. Happy 70th birthday, Luther Vandross. I'll go play myself some Luther Vandross and see if I can get myself a little lady. Listen to some Luther Vandross. All right, next one. Good Sam, because camping season's coming. Let's see why Good Sam is trending. Pick one to have a chance to win one. Must use Good Sam. Giving away Good Sam merchandise certificates. Enjoy a $100 shopping spree on us. So, is Good Sam a store now too? Because I know that it was a camping club. Like you go in, you got your Good Sam membership, and then you got a certain discount off of certain campgrounds. And, you know, this learning because I used to work in a campground. I guess there's something going on with Good Sam that I don't understand. But I do know that, yes, it is camping season, or it's getting into camping season right now in Wisconsin, and even down in some parts of Oklahoma, surprisingly enough. It's still a little bit cold to go camping, but we are getting into camping season. So Good Sam is going to start becoming popular as well. All right. How many have we done so far? We did 420, The Nuge, Vandross, Good Sam. All right, Tomlin. Last one we're going to do is Tomlin. And this whole Eric Cantor thing, I looked at that before I went live because I wanted to see if that was something I had to add to the news program, and it wasn't. It was a Republican who was the majority leader in the House who came out and said Barack Obama was bad. That's not news. That's a Tuesday. The Steelers have announced a 3-year contract extension for Mike Tomlin, keeping the head coach in place through 2024. So it looks like Mike Tomlin is going to continue to be the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I didn't pay attention to football last year at all, and I'm probably likely not going to do it this year unless they clean up their fucking act. So, well, good on Tomlin, I guess. That's probably a pretty good career move, but honestly, I can't be troubled to care. And this is coming from somebody who has said the quote from the 30-Point Buck song, Gosh, I love the Packers, eh? You know, I sit out there on the Sunday and I watch the Packers and, you know, I just love the Packers. All right, and that's going to be it for the day. Let's get some music up here and let's head the hell out of here, eh? What do you think? Get on with our day, throw up some music, and let's go to it. Let's do it. All right, well, thanks everybody who came by and hung out and chatted in the live chat today. And make sure you keep the chat flowing as well, because I always do thank everybody who chats in the live chat throughout the week. So, and thanks 80s Kid too, by the way. I caught your message out of the corner of my eye because the chat's right over there, and saw the glowing praises you've been giving to me. Tell a friend and tell 10 friends. Get some more people in here. We'll see if we can't build a better news program and get some more discussion going too. So that's absolutely awesome. Thank you. We will be back here tomorrow for more contemporary and more news headlines for the morning before we all get off and go to work. Thank you guys for having your coffee with me in the morning, and we will see you tomorrow. I will raise my coffee glass to you. Until then, I'm Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary.